I thank the Civic Exchange for inviting me and for the opportunity to have a debate with all of you this afternoon. As expected, I seem to be the only voice, at least at this stage, to have some concerns or skepticism towards nuclear power. So I will lead you through that, but then I really hope we will have an opportunity to discuss, because there are some issues that I would like to touch that my previous predecessors who talked touched. So my presentation basically has two parts. One is discussing the possible role of nuclear power in tackling climate change, and the other basically compares nuclear power to other technologies that are available today, and to give us a picture about the choices actually that we potentially have. So when it comes to the role of nuclear power, as I've said, I would like to quote the Energy Technologies Perspective report launched by the International Energy Agency this June, which has this blue map scenario that has been mentioned before. And that's a scenario that actually looks how the world could cut the carbon emissions from energy to 14 gigatons by 2050. And it's interesting that this blue map scenario actually anticipates fourfold expansion of nuclear power globally by 2050, which would mean building roughly 1,400 new large reactors in the next 40 years. And it's also interesting that actually, even if we undergo this quite complicated exercise, which brings its costs, risks, and implications, the contribution of nuclear power, even at this scale, is only 6% to the greenhouse gas emissions cuts from the energy sector. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Again, we need to think about things in their proportions. What would be the implications of building more than 1,000 new reactors? Obviously, it's one of the issues is the reactor safety and the hazards from potential accidents. And I would like to illustrate that on the possibly most developed third generation type of reactor, which is the EPR, developed by French company Areva. And it has been, there are 4 reactors of this type under construction, 1 in France, 1 in Finland, 2 in China. And in Finland, the safety authorities identified already 3,000 deficiencies. There has been 3 years delay and over 3 billion euros cost overrun, which has been happening so far. And it's interesting to see that actually the safety problems are related to almost all single components of the primary circuit. So there have been troubles with the reactor pressure vessel, with the main cooling piping, with the containment of steel liner, with even the reactor basemate. And these are slides from the most recent report by ASN, which is the French Nuclear Safety Authority, which has identified these things on the second reactor of this type under construction in France, which actually shows that not even the French industry, which is absolutely leading the world, is not capable of doing their work properly at their own home. So we can again see mistakes that are repeated from what was happening in Finland 2 years before the construction came to this stage in France, like cracking the concrete base, that actually there are cracks going through the whole thickness of the basemate, more than 2 meters. There are problems with the containment liner, with quality of welding, with quality of the key components that are critical for nuclear safety. To give you one more slide, this is a hypothetical impact of perhaps the worst case accident scenario with pressurized water reactors. We don't talk about Chernobyl this time, but this is a mapping. How would a contamination look in case of heavy meltdown accident in German reactor? And you can see actually quite significant contamination. The red and purple color indicates the level of contamination by cesium-137, which is the isotope that has pretty long half-life. Therefore, those areas actually would technically need to be evacuated for long periods of time, 100, 200 years possibly. And you can compare that to the same scale of map of Hong Kong and surrounding mainland. The other issue, apart from nuclear safety, is the fuel supply and the availability. Perhaps we have actually again the same source. This is quoting again the Red Book, the publication by Nuclear Energy Agency published this year, which says that there is 5.4 million tons of estimated, which is basically identified and inferred, which means estimated resources globally of uranium. And if you look at the current consumption rate, which is about 60,000 tons per year, that actually translates to about less than 100 years of available supply of uranium. And of course, if you talk about the scenarios that would multiply the number of reactors by fourfold, then apparently, proportionally, those resources, the lifespan would be diminished. Another thing that actually is important to consider is that the uranium market is pretty reduced to a handsome number of countries. Actually, 7 single countries produce more than 90% of uranium supplies today. And for example, China, when it comes to the global reserves, estimated has only 3% of the total global reserves. So that brings some questions about the necessity to import the fuel or being dependent on other countries. Another implication is environmental damage, because on one hand, we often hear the nuclear industry saying we need only as much as nuclear fuel to generate enough electricity for a whole year for your household. But actually, to get that amount of nuclear fuel, there is a pretty dirty and environmentally impacting process how you need to extract the uranium ore from the ground, which on average has very low concentration, like 0.1% of uranium. So actually you need to extract lots of uranium ore. You need to process it, and there is lots of waste, big amounts of waste that are generated through the whole fuel chain process, from the uranium mining, milling, processing, conversion, enrichment, until you actually get to the moment when you have nuclear fuel to be able to operate your reactor. And at the end, you also have about 20 tons, 25 tons of spent fuel coming out of 1 year's operation of 1,000 megawatt reactor. And this is one of the Achilles' heels of the nuclear industry, because this waste is really extremely radiotoxic. It contains about 1% of plutonium, which has half-life of 24,000 years. And even 1 year's worth of operating reactor produces enough plutonium to poison a million people possibly. And so therefore it requires extremely long-term isolation from environment and from human, which has not been achieved, and there are no safe isolation solutions. Another thing, if you talk about the fuel supply, someone says nuclear is clean. I mean, it may seem clean if you look at the nuclear power plant itself, but again, there are severe environment and health impacts through all the fuel chain. So for example, Areva, which is the French supplier of Diabay and possibly supplier of some of the Chinese nuclear fuel, takes its uranium from Niger in Africa. And we've organized a mission there with experts last year, which came to the town. There are about 80,000 people living in 2 towns, mining towns in that region. And on the streets in the center of those towns, there are spots where the radiation level exceeds 500 times the natural background. So if a person spends there 1 hour a day, he would or she would actually get a level of radiation dose that exceeds the annual limit and potentially have health impacts. This is a picture from the German nuclear waste dump in Asse, which was supposed to be the pilot nuclear waste project or management project in Germany. And it has ended with big fiasco, because after 20 years of operation, actually there was lots of water leaking into that deposit, and there was lots of corrosion leakages. And now the government is facing the task actually to take all the barrels up back to the ground and basically reprocess it somehow. And there is no long-term solution. We are not even able today to secure safe storage of low-level nuclear waste for 20 years, not talking about spent fuel for hundreds of thousands of years. The last issue is economics, and maybe on this graph I would show that the fact that actually even in a highly centralized and state-controlled nuclear industry, this is the costs of building French reactors domestically. It's in constant currency, and you can see that even within France, the costs more than doubled during the 15 years of nuclear buildup. So actually, instead of talking about learning by doing, we've seen a situation where actually the French nuclear industry has been unlearning by doing more. And if you put to the graph the current costs of the more recent reactors, they are just above the scale. So again, my position is that if we agree or if we consider expanding nuclear power that big way, it still reduces the greenhouse gas emissions only by a few percent. And we think it's not worth all the hazards, the geopolitics around uranium crunch, environmental damage, and the trillions of dollars of costs. To compare it, a couple of more slides about the possibilities to actually choose different pathway. This is a graph that shows annual addition of new capacities of wind, which are the blue bars, and nuclear, which are the red bars. And you can actually see that there has been massive upscale of wind installations globally. In 2009, only there was 38, nearly 1,000 megawatts of new wind added to the grid, while in comparison to that, actually nuclear is really lagging behind. These are the red bars. And the new installed wind in just one single year in 2009 generates as much as new electricity, additional electricity, as if 12 reactors have been built that year, which actually I think happened 17 years ago the last time. The shifting pattern actually from nuclear power to renewables is actually very visible also in European Union, or basically across Europe, where there are lots of progressive policies. And this graph shows the net installed capacities of various technologies. And you can actually see that the winner number one is wind. Then there is gas, PV, which is the solar photovoltaics. There is net decrease in coal, net decrease in nuclear. And this is the additions in 2009. If you look at the whole decade, from 2000 to 2009, again, it's natural gas, wind, PV, who are the front runners, and then there is net decrease in nuclear and coal generating capacities across Europe. Why is this happening? Apparently, it's a matter of not only environmental policies, climate policies, but also a matter of investments and economics. And what we've seen is that many of the modern renewable technologies, especially wind, are actually, because of the upscaling, they are reducing their costs. This is the generating cost per kilowatt hour in cents. And you can see that actually compared to the red chart that actually shows potentially the starting situation today and potentially increasing costs of both conventional sources like thermal coal or nuclear, because we have seen pretty much expansion of nuclear investment costs in history. So we can rather anticipate increasing costs from traditional energy sources, while there is significant drops in the costs from renewables. And we seem to be reaching the cost parity between wind and nuclear, especially these years in some of the countries. I'll skip this one. And last couple of more slides. There has been also studies showing that actually 100% renewable energy supply for Europe is possible. Strangely enough, this is a report by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was launched earlier this year, which shows the roadmap actually showing that technically this is not an issue anymore. The maturity of the technologies already today available on the markets is sufficient actually to underperform such a task. And there was another study released by McKinsey and the European Climate Foundation that actually compares also the costs. And it shows that even if we go for 100% renewable supply targets by 2050, the levelized costs of such exercise and energy supply would be 5 to 10% higher compared to the base scenario. So the cost difference actually is not that dramatic anymore. And again, it shows that even economically, not only technically, but even economically, we can go to switch from the dirty and risky energies to renewables. They go for significant upscaling of solar PV installed on the cities, on the rooftops. The wind supply both offshore in the neighborhood of the town and in the town itself, like the micro generation. And they also focus very much, which I haven't seen in the Hong Kong Energy Place plan, to reduce the energy use, increase the energy efficiency in residential buildings and commercial buildings, not only the new ones, but also the current houses that are standing, which I think are the biggest reservoirs of energy efficiency, not only in London, but also in Hong Kong, and we need to tap to that. Thank you.
Jan, thank you very much. Well, there is obviously some issues to debate later on. So if I can just ask Richard to finish this section of the presentations before we have a short break, and then you can come back and ask your questions.